Scars of Time, Love Again. Chapter 1: The Winter Homecoming. At 52 years old, Margaret had spent more than half her life running from this town, running from the memories that lived inside every street, every house, every quiet sunset over the Atlantic Ocean. She had built a new life in the bustling city, a calm, controlled life of quiet routine, independent success, and carefully guarded loneliness. She was a respected interior designer, a woman with a steady career, a comfortable apartment, and a reputation for being unshakable, unemotional, and completely self-sufficient. No one in her city life knew the broken girl she had been here. No one knew the love that had shattered her youth and left her heart scarred for 40 years. Her mother's funeral had brought her back. A quiet, gentle passing in old age, leaving Margaret the last living member of her immediate family, leaving behind this empty house filled with faded photographs, worn furniture, and the heavy weight of everything she had spent decades trying to forget. She had planned to stay only a week, to settle the estate, sign the papers, clean the house, and vanish back to the city before the past could catch up to her. But fate had never been kind to Margaret Hale, and fate had never intended to let her leave Havenbrook without facing the man who had ruined her youth and haunted every quiet night of her adulthood. Margaret's chest ached as she stepped inside the old house, the familiar scent of cedar wood and old lavender wrapping around her like a bittersweet hug. Sunlight filtered through frosted windows, casting thin golden streaks across wooden floors scuffed by decades of footsteps. Every corner held a memory, her teenage laughter, her mother's soft voice, the quiet, stolen moments with the only man she had ever loved. Elias Voss. The name settled heavy in her chest, a cold, familiar ache she had thought she had buried forever. Elias Voss. 40 years ago, he had been the bright, reckless, irresistibly charming boy from the wrong side of the tracks, the boy who had loved her fiercely, wildly, unapologetically, the boy who had promised her forever before vanishing from her life without a single word of explanation. Now, at 54 years old, he was the most powerful man in Havenbrook, a self-made millionaire, a real estate tycoon who owned half the town, a widower with a quiet, somber reputation for being cold, unforgiving, and permanently closed off from love. Time had turned the passionate boy into a hardened, solitary man, just as time had turned her hopeful young girl's heart into something quiet, guarded, and afraid to feel anything at all. Margaret spent her first day alone in the house, sorting through old boxes, folding her mother's clothes, staring at faded Polaroids of her teenage years, trying not to let the grief and the nostalgia overwhelm her. She told herself she was over it all. She was middle-aged, mature, stable. She had survived heartbreak, survived loneliness, survived years of wondering what she had done wrong to make Elias abandon her so cruelly. She had married once, a gentle, kind man who had loved her quietly, but the marriage had faded into amiable divorce after 5 years, because a heart scarred too deeply could never fully open to new love. She had spent the rest of her life alone, convinced her capacity for passionate, all-consuming love had died the day Elias left her. She planned to avoid him entirely during her short stay. She would not drive past his mansion on the cliffside, would not attend any town gatherings, would not step foot in any place he might appear. She would finish her business and leave, just as she had done every time she had been forced to return to Havenbrook over the past 40 years. But fate had other plans. Late that afternoon, as the winter sun dipped low over the ocean, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and grey, Margaret walked down to the waterfront pier, the same pier where she and Elias had spent every summer evening of their teenage love. She needed fresh air, needed to escape the suffocating weight of memories inside the house. The wooden planks were cold and slippery beneath her boots, the ocean wind sharp and salty against her cheeks. She stood at the railing, staring out at the endless grey water, her mind drifting back to the summer she was 18, the summer Elias had told her he loved her for the first time, the summer they had planned a future together, a life of marriage, children, quiet happiness, endless love. Margaret. The voice was deep, rough, weathered by time, yet instantly, devastatingly familiar. It was the voice she had memorized as a girl, the voice she had heard in her dreams for 40 years, the voice she had never expected to hear again in person. Margaret's entire body froze. Her breath caught in her throat, her hands tightening around the wooden railing until her knuckles whitened. She did not dare turn around. She knew who stood behind her before she saw him. There was only one person in this town who could speak her name like that, low and reverent and broken, like he had spent 40 years waiting to say it again. Slowly, trembling slightly despite every effort to stay composed, Margaret turned. Elias Voss stood 10 feet behind her, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading winter sunset. Time had changed him, softened the sharp recklessness of youth and replaced it with rugged, distinguished maturity. His dark hair was streaked heavily with silver at the temples, his jawline still strong and defined, his shoulders broad and steady from decades of hard work and hard living. His eyes, once bright and warm with youthful passion, were now deep, stormy hazel, lined with faint wrinkles of age and grief, filled with a raw, unreadable emotion that made Margaret's heart lurch violently in her chest. He was older, weathered, broken in his own quiet way, but he was still him. Still the boy who had owned her entire heart, when she was young, still the man who had destroyed it without a second thought. Elias, she said, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotion raging inside her. She refused to let him see her weakness, refused to let him know he still had the power to shake her world after 40 years. He took a slow, hesitant step forward, his gaze sweeping over her face, drinking her in like he had spent a lifetime starved for the sight of her. I heard you were back. For your mother's funeral. Word travels fast in a small town, Margaret replied flatly, her tone cool and distant, walls fully erected. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her hurt, her longing, her unresolved grief. Elias's expression softened, a faint, weary sadness settling over his features. You look exactly the same. Still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The words were quiet, sincere, no charm, no pretense, just raw, honest truth. Margaret's chest tightened sharply, an old, buried flame flaring to life after decades of dormancy. She had spent 40 years hating him, resenting him, trying to forget him, but in that single moment, all the anger melted away into aching, desperate longing. Save your compliments, Elias, she said sharply, turning back to the ocean, avoiding his intense gaze. They mean nothing after 40 years of silence. He did not step back. He did not leave. He stood there in the fading sunlight, quiet and persistent, a man determined not to let her walk away again. I know I have no right to speak to you. No right to stand here after everything I did. But I needed to see you. I needed to know you were real, that you were finally home. This is not my home anymore, Margaret retorted. I haven't had a home here since you left. The words hung heavy in the cold ocean air, a blunt, painful reminder of the chasm between them. Elias flinched visibly, his jaw tightening, his eyes darkening with regret. He deserved every harsh word she gave him. He knew that better than anyone. They stood in silence for long minutes, the ocean wind swirling between them, carrying the weight of 40 years of lost time, lost love, lost explanations. So much unsaid, so much hurt, so many unanswered questions that had haunted Margaret her entire adult life. Why had he left? Why had he vanished overnight, with no call, no letter, no goodbye? Why had he let her grieve for him for years, let her believe she had been abandoned and unlovable? Before either of them could speak again, the sound of soft footsteps cut through the quiet. A woman walked toward them along the pier, elegant and poised in a tailored winter coat, her chestnut hair perfectly styled, her features soft and refined. Clara Mercer, 50 years old, a local philanthropist, Elias's long-term partner of 15 years. The woman everyone in town assumed he would marry, the woman who had stood by his side through his wife's illness and death, through his rise to wealth and power, through every quiet, lonely year of his middle age. Clara's gentle smile faded the second she saw Margaret standing beside Elias. Her warm eyes flicked between the two older adults, instantly reading the thick, charged history hanging in the air, the quiet tension that crackled between them like static electricity. She stopped a few feet away, her posture stiffening with quiet insecurity and quiet sorrow. "Elias," she said softly, her voice calm but strained. "I was looking for you. You missed your evening appointment." Elias's gaze did not leave Margaret's face. His entire focus remained fixed on the woman he had lost 40 years ago, the woman he had never stopped loving. "I'm busy, Clara. Give me a few minutes." Clara's expression faltered. 15 years of quiet devotion, 15 years of loving him patiently, 15 years of building a peaceful, steady life with him, and in an instant, she was invisible. She was always invisible when Margaret Hale returned to town. Margaret felt a sharp surge of guilt. She had no desire to be the other woman, no desire to disrupt the life Elias had built in her absence. She had spent 40 years moving on, or trying to, and she refused to destroy another person's happiness, because of a long-buried love. "I should go," Margaret said immediately, stepping back from the railing, preparing to flee. "I have things to do at the house. It was good to see you, Elias. I hope you have a good life." It was a final, polite goodbye, an attempt to close the door on their history once and for all. But Elias reached out quickly, his gloved hand wrapping gently around her wrist, holding her in place. His touch was warm, familiar, achingly nostalgic, sending a shiver down her spine that she could not suppress. "Don't run," he whispered, his voice low and desperate, only for her ears. "Not again. Please. I need to talk to you. Properly. After 40 years, I owe you the truth." Margaret's heart hammered wildly. The truth. After 40 years of wondering, after 40 years of pain and confusion, he finally wanted to explain. But standing there with Clara watching them, her eyes sad and wounded, Margaret could not bring herself to agree. "This isn't the time or place," she said firmly, pulling her wrist free from his grip. "Let it go, Elias. We're too old for second chances. Too old for broken dreams." With that, she turned and walked away, her steps fast and determined, refusing to look back. She could feel Elias's gaze burning into her back, heavy with regret and longing, and she could feel Clara's quiet, heartbroken stare following her as she fled down the pier and back toward the quiet residential streets of her childhood neighborhood. As she disappeared around the corner, Margaret knew her quiet, uneventful week in Havenbrook was over. The past she had spent 40 years burying had resurfaced, and this time, there was no running away. Chapter 2: 40 Years of Misunderstanding. That night, Margaret lay awake in her childhood bedroom, staring up at the faded ceiling, unable to sleep. The room was exactly as she had left it as a teenager: soft floral wallpaper, a wooden desk covered in old-school notes, a windowsill lined with faded trinkets from her youth. Every detail pulled her back to the girl she had been at 18, hopeful, naive, utterly, hopelessly in love with a boy who had shattered her entire world. Her mind replayed the afternoon on the pier on a relentless loop: Elias's weathered face, his soft confession, his desperate plea for her to stay and listen. For 40 years, she had believed he had left her because he had outgrown her, because he had wanted a bigger, better life than the small-town love they had shared. She had believed he had chosen ambition over love, freedom over forever, wealth over the quiet future they had planned together. She had carried that bitterness like a weight in her chest for decades, letting it shape every relationship, every decision, every part of her adult life. But the look in his eyes that afternoon had told a different story. There was no indifference, no regret for leaving her, no relief at moving on. There was only grief, endless, decades-old grief, and a longing so deep it bordered on agony. What if she had been wrong all along? What if there had been a reason? A secret she had never uncovered, a sacrifice he had never confessed, a pain he had carried alone for 40 years. The thought kept her awake long into the winter night, twisting at her heart, reopening old wounds she had thought were fully healed. She tossed and turned beneath the old quilt, her mind spinning with memories of their youthful love, the late-night drives along the coast, the stolen kisses under the pier lights, the quiet promises they had whispered to each other under the stars. They had been so young, so sure of their forever, so convinced nothing could tear them apart. The next morning, Margaret woke exhausted, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness, her mind still tangled in the past. She sipped hot coffee at the kitchen table, staring out the frosted window at the quiet winter street, debating whether she should stay in town longer, whether she should hear Elias out, whether she dared reopen the door to a love that had destroyed her once before. Before she could make up her mind, there was a soft knock at her front door. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly who it was. She hesitated for a long moment, debating ignoring the knock, hiding away, continuing to run from the truth she had spent 40 years craving. But curiosity, and unresolved heartache won out. She stood, walked slowly to the door, and pulled it open. Elias stood on her front porch, dressed in a simple dark coat, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his expression quiet and nervous, uncharacteristically unsure of himself. The powerful, confident millionaire was gone. In his place was a vulnerable, middle-aged man haunted by the mistakes of his youth. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice tentative. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You are," Margaret replied bluntly, but she did not close the door. "What do you want, Elias?" "I want to talk," he said firmly. 10 minutes. That's all I ask. If after 10 minutes you never want to see me again, I'll leave you alone for the rest of your life. I swear it." Margaret stared at him, studying his earnest face, the tired lines around his eyes, the quiet desperation in his gaze. 40 years of questions hung between them, 40 years of pain and misunderstanding. She owed herself the truth, even if it hurt. Even if it broke her all over again. "Fine," she said finally, stepping back to let him inside. 10 minutes only. Elias stepped across the threshold into the quiet house, his gaze sweeping over the familiar rooms, his face softening with nostalgia. He had been here countless times when they were young, had laughed in this kitchen, kissed her in this living room, held her while she cried over small teenage heartaches. The house held as many of his memories as it held hers. They settled at the wooden kitchen table, across from each other, the air thick and tense. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft light over their weathered faces, highlighting the decades that had passed between their youth and their middle age. Elias took a deep, shaky breath, gathering his courage after 40 years of silence. "I need you to listen to me carefully, Margaret. Everything you thought happened 40 years ago is wrong. Every single thing." Margaret's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't leave you because I didn't love you," he said quietly, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. "I didn't leave you because I wanted a different life, because I wanted freedom, or wealth, or someone else. I left you because I had no choice. Because I was forced to." Margaret stared at him in stunned silence, her mind reeling. "Forced? By who?" "My mother," Elias said, the words heavy and bitter after decades of silence. "You remember how she was. Cold, cruel, obsessed with status and reputation. She hated you from the moment we started dating. Hated that I loved a girl from a quiet, ordinary family, hated that you made me happy in ways money and status never could." Margaret nodded slowly. She had known Elias's mother disapproved of their relationship when they were young, had always looked down on her family's modest lifestyle, had always made it clear she thought Margaret was not good enough for her son. But she had never imagined that disapproval could lead to destruction. 40 years ago, the week before we were supposed to leave town together, before we were going to move to the city and start our life, Elias continued, his voice breaking slightly, my mother came to me with an ultimatum. She told me if I stayed with you, if I ran away, and built a life with you like we planned, she would ruin your father's small business. She would bankrupt him, destroy his reputation, make sure your family had nothing left. She said she would make your mother sick with stress, would destroy every good thing your family had worked for. Tears pricked at Elias's eyes, tears he had held back for 40 years. She knew your family was everything to you. She knew you would never forgive me if I let them suffer because of our love. She told me I had two choices: leave you quietly, let you hate me and move on with a safe, happy life, or destroy your entire family for my own selfish happiness. Margaret sat frozen in her chair, shock washing over her in brutal waves. For 40 years, she had believed he had abandoned her out of greed and ambition. For 40 years, she had hated him for choosing himself over their love. But the truth was infinitely worse, infinitely more tragic. He had left her to save her family. He had sacrificed their entire future to protect the people she loved. I was 18, Elias whispered, his face etched with unbearable pain. I was a kid. I had no money, no power, no way to stop her. She controlled every part of my life back then. I couldn't fight her. I couldn't protect both you and your family. So I chose your family. I chose to let you hate me so you could have a safe, stable life, so you wouldn't lose everything you had. Why didn't you tell me? Margaret cried out, tears finally spilling down her cheeks after 40 years of suppressed grief. Why didn't you explain? I would have understood. I would have helped you fight her. I would have lost everything with you before I let you carry this alone. Because she threatened you too, Elias said brokenly. She said if I told you the truth, if you tried to fight back, she would make sure you paid the price. She said she would ruin your future, sabotage every chance you had at success, make sure you never had a good life. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't let her hurt you. I thought letting you hate me was the only way to keep you safe. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers, not daring to touch her, terrified of crossing a line after 40 years apart. I let you believe I was cruel, selfish, unfaithful. I let you grieve for me, let you move on, let you build a life without me. I carried every ounce of guilt and pain alone for 40 years. I never told a single soul the truth. I let everyone in town think I was the heartless boy who abandoned his first love. Margaret's chest shattered. All the anger, all the bitterness, all the resentment she had carried for 4 decades dissolved into raw, agonizing sorrow. She had wasted 40 years hating a man who had loved her so fiercely he had sacrificed their entire future to protect her. She had wasted 40 years living with a broken heart that had never needed to break at all. I waited for you, she whispered, her voice shaking with tears. I waited for months. I cried every night. I thought I wasn't enough. I thought my love was worthless. I spent years believing I'd lost the only person who ever loved me because I was unworthy. Elias's face crumpled with guilt. I know. I've tortured myself with that every single day. I watched you from afar for years. Watched you grieve, watched you struggle, watched you marry and divorce, watched you build a lonely life for yourself. I wanted to step in, wanted to explain, wanted to hold you and fix everything, but my mother kept threatening your family well into your adulthood. She swore if I ever told you the truth, she would destroy everything you had built. Your mother is dead now. Margaret asked quietly. 10 years ago, Elias confirmed. The second she died, I wanted to find you. I wanted to beg for your forgiveness, wanted to tell you everything. But I was terrified. Terrified you would never forgive me for letting you suffer alone for so long. Terrified you had already moved on, that you hated me too deeply to ever listen. They sat in silence for long minutes, the weight of 40 years of misunderstanding crashing over them both, breaking down every wall, every grudge, every wound they had carried alone for decades. The cruel, heartbreaking truth of their youth was finally laid bare, raw and unvarnished between them. I married young, Elias said softly, continuing his story. My mother forced me into an arranged marriage the year after I left you. A quiet, gentle girl from a wealthy family. I never loved her. Not once. But I stayed with her out of obligation, out of guilt, out of the knowledge that I could never have the love I truly wanted. She got sick 20 years ago, terminal cancer. I cared for her until she died 5 years later. I've been alone ever since, except for Clara. Margaret's gaze softened. Clara loves you. Clara is kind, loyal, good, Elias admitted. She stood by me through my wife's illness, through my grief, through my darkest years. I care for her deeply. But I have never loved her. Not the way I loved you. Not the way I still love you. The confession hung in the quiet kitchen, bold and unashamed, 40 years of hidden love finally spoken aloud. Before Margaret could process his words, before she could find her voice to respond, the front door opened quietly. Clara stood in the doorway, her face pale and devastated, having heard every single word of Elias's confession. Her eyes were glistening with tears, her perfect composure completely shattered, her heart broken open in an instant. She had come to bring Elias lunch, to check on him, to hold on to the quiet life they had built together. Instead, she had walked in on the man she had loved faithfully for 15 years, admitting he had never loved her at all, that his heart had belonged to another woman for 40 long years. The middle-aged love triangle, the decades of secrets, the endless cycle of sacrifice and heartbreak, all of it collided in that quiet winter kitchen, turning a long-buried tragedy into a fresh, devastating disaster for 3 broken people. Chapter 3: The Broken Third Wheel. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her hands trembling, her eyes locked on Elias with a mix of disbelief, sorrow, and quiet rage. For 15 years, she had loved him selflessly, patiently, unconditionally. She had watched him grieve his late wife, had supported his business empire, had comforted him through every lonely night, had dreamed of growing old with him, of finally earning his full love and devotion. She had known he carried old grief, had known he had a lost love in his youth, but she had believed with time, with loyalty, with kindness, she could erase the past and win his heart completely. She had been wrong. Terribly, devastatingly wrong. You never loved me, she whispered, her voice breaking, echoing through the silent kitchen. All these years. All the nights I stayed up with you, all the times I comforted you, all the dreams I had for us, you never loved me at all. Elias stood immediately, his face filled with urgent guilt and sorrow. Clara, let me explain. Explain what? She cut him off, tears streaming down her cheeks. Explain that I was just a placeholder. A distraction while you waited for a ghost from your past to come home. Explain that I wasted 15 years of my life loving a man whose heart died 40 years ago with his first love. Her words were sharp and broken, every syllable laced with the agony of 15 years of unrequited love. Margaret sat silently at the table, her heart aching for the other woman. She knew exactly what it felt like to love Elias Voss and be left empty-handed, to devote your heart to a man who could never fully give it back. She had lived that pain for 40 years. She did not wish it on anyone. Clara, I care for you more than I can say, Elias said desperately, reaching for her. You've been my rock, my stability, my closest friend for 15 years. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to lead you on. But you did, Clara cried, stepping back from his outstretched hand. You let me fall in love with you. You let me plan a future with you. You let me believe we were building something real, while your heart was always here with her. She gestured toward Margaret, her eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. I've spent years hearing people whisper about your first love, about the girl you lost. I told myself it was just youth, just old history. I told myself time had erased those feelings. But they never faded. They were always here, burning brighter than anything we ever had. Margaret stood slowly, her voice soft and sincere, desperate to diffuse the pain she had unintentionally caused. Clara, I had no idea you were here. I had no intention of hurting you. I came back to town, just to settle my mother's estate. I had no plan to reconnect with Elias, no desire to destroy your life. But you did anyway, Clara said bitterly, wiping tears from her cheeks. The second you stepped back into this town, you ruined everything. 15 years of my life gone in a single day, all because a man can never let go of his first love. The room was thick with unbearable tension, 3 middle-aged people trapped in a tangled web of decades-old secrets, unrequited love, and cruel fate. None of them were truly evil, none of them intended to hurt each other, yet all of them were broken, all of them were suffering. I'm so sorry, Margaret repeated, her heart heavy with guilt. I would never have come here if I knew it would destroy your happiness. It's not your fault, Elias said firmly, his gaze hardening with resolve. It's my fault. All of it. I should have ended things with Clara years ago. I should have never let her love me when I knew my heart was never hers. I was selfish. I wanted stability, wanted comfort, wanted someone to ease my loneliness, even if I could never give her the love she deserved. Clara closed her eyes, absorbing his brutal honesty, the final confirmation of her worst fears. So it's over then. Us? After 15 years, it's just done. Elias's voice was quiet and final, filled with endless regret. I can't keep pretending, Clara. I can't keep living a lie, keeping you in a relationship where you will never be loved fully. You deserve someone who chooses you completely, someone who has no ghosts, no past, no lost love haunting their every breath. Clara nodded slowly, accepting the truth, her shoulders slumping with defeat. I deserved that 15 years ago. I deserved the truth 15 years ago. Without another word, she turned and walked out the front door, closing it softly behind her, leaving Elias and Margaret alone in the quiet, empty kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of a broken relationship and a resurrected past. Silence fell over the house, heavy and somber. Margaret stared at Elias, her heart swirling with conflicting emotions, sorrow for Clara, guilt over the pain they had caused, overwhelming grief for the 40 years they had lost, and a quiet, forbidden hope that maybe, after everything, they could finally have the future they had been robbed of as kids. I ruined her life, Elias whispered, running a hand roughly through his silver-streaked hair, his face etched with self-loathing. I ruined 2 women's lives in one lifetime. The woman I loved and the woman who loved me. You were a kid then, Margaret said softly, stepping closer to him, her voice gentle. You made the only choice you could make at 18. You sacrificed everything to protect me. I don't hate you anymore, Elias. I can't hate you now that I know the truth. He lifted his gaze to hers, his hazel eyes glistening with tears, raw and vulnerable. Do you forgive me? Margaret hesitated, her heart pounding. Forgiveness was easy. The harder question was whether they could move forward, whether 40 years of lost time could ever be reclaimed, whether 2 broken middle-aged people could build a new life from the ashes of their shattered youth. I forgive you, she said finally, quietly, sincerely. But forgiveness doesn't fix the past. It doesn't give us back the years we lost. We're 50 years old, Elias. We have wrinkles, scars, failed marriages, lonely histories. We're not kids anymore. We can't just pick up where we left off. Why not? He asked fiercely, stepping closer to her, closing the distance between them. His tall frame loomed gently over her, his gaze intense and desperate. Why can't we? We spent our entire lives waiting for each other. We suffered alone for 40 years, so we could finally be free now, finally be together without fear, without threats, without my mother's cruelty hanging over us. What about Clara? Margaret asked. We just destroyed her. How can we be happy knowing we broke her heart? Clara will heal, Elias said softly. She's strong. She's kind. She'll find someone who loves her the way she deserves. But we will never heal if we let fear and guilt keep us apart now. We've wasted enough time, Margaret. 40 years is more than enough. He lifted his hand gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch soft and reverent, like he was touching something holy and precious. I've loved you every single day for 40 years. Not a day has passed where I haven't thought of you, haven't regretted the choice I had to make, haven't dreamed of getting a second chance. Let's take that chance now. Please. Margaret's knees weakened. After 40 years of heartbreak, loneliness, and misunderstanding, the love of her life was finally standing in front of her, begging for a future together, finally free of the secrets and threats that had torn them apart. Every part of her wanted to say yes, to grab onto this second chance with both hands, to finally get the happy ending she had been denied her entire life. But middle age had taught her caution, had taught her that happy endings were never simple, never without cost. There was still so much pain, so much fallout, so many broken pieces to mend. Let's take it slow, she whispered, her voice shaky. No rushing. No promises. Just us, getting to know each other again. After 40 years. A faint, relieved smile tugged at Elias's lips, the first genuine, happy smile he had worn in 40 years. I'll take slow. I'll take anything, as long as it's you. Chapter 4 Town Gossip and Hidden Guilt. The small coastal town of Havenbrook thrived on gossip, and the explosive breakup between Elias Voss and Clara Mercer spread like wildfire within 24 hours. Everyone in town knew the story within days. The wealthy, reserved millionaire had ended his 15-year relationship with the beloved local philanthropist, all because his childhood first love had returned to town after 40 years away. Whispers circulated in every cafe, every grocery store, every community gathering. People talked about the tragic old love story, about the secret sacrifice no one had ever known about the cruel twist of fate that had torn two soulmates apart in their youth only to reunite them in middle age. Some people sympathized with Elias and Margaret, marveling at the enduring power of a love that had survived 40 years of separation and misunderstanding. Others sided with Clara, criticizing Margaret for returning to town and destroying a stable, long-term relationship, accusing her of being a homewrecker, a selfish woman, who had come back to steal a man who had built a good life without her. Margaret felt the weight of the town's judgment heavily over the next 2 weeks. She had extended her stay in Havenbrook, unable to leave now that she had finally reconnected with Elias, now that the truth was finally out in the open. She spent her days settling her mother's estate and her quiet evenings with Elias, reconnecting after 4 decades apart, learning the middle-aged versions of each other, sharing the stories of their lonely, broken adult lives. They walked the waterfront together every evening, just as they had as teenagers, talking for hours about everything they had missed, failed relationships, career struggles, quiet grief, lonely holidays, the small, ordinary moments they had spent apart. They laughed at old memories, cried over lost time, and slowly, gently, fell in love all over again, not as reckless teenagers with naive dreams, but as mature, scarred adults who understood the true value of love, sacrifice, and second chances. But the guilt never fully faded. Margaret could not stop thinking about Clara, about the woman who had loved Elias faithfully for 15 years, who had been left heartbroken and alone through no fault of her own. She heard from town neighbors that Clara had withdrawn from all social events, had stopped volunteering at local charities, had isolated herself in her quiet home, broken and humiliated by the public breakup. One cold winter afternoon, Margaret decided she could not carry the guilt any longer. She needed to apologize, needed to face Clara, needed to take responsibility for the unintended pain she had caused. She drove across town to Clara's quiet, elegant home on the west side of Havenbrook, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her heart nervous and heavy. She knew Clara had every right to hate her, every right to refuse her apology, every right to never want to see her face again. She knocked gently on the front door, waiting patiently. After a long moment, the door opened, revealing a tired, hollow-eyed Clara. Her perfect composure was gone, her hair messy, her face pale, her eyes still red and swollen from endless crying. She looked broken, utterly defeated by heartbreak. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked flatly, no anger, no malice, just quiet exhaustion. "I came to apologize," Margaret said sincerely. "I know nothing I say can fix what happened, can erase the pain I caused you. But I need you to know I never intended to hurt you. I never wanted to destroy your relationship, or take your life apart." Clara stepped back, allowing her inside the quiet, empty house. The rooms were still and silent, stripped of the warmth and laughter that had once filled them during her years with Elias. "Sit down." They sat across from each other in the quiet living room, two middle-aged women bound by their love for the same broken man, two victims of a decades-old secret they had never been allowed to know. "I heard the whole story," Clara said quietly. "About Elias's mother, about the ultimatum, about why he left you 40 years ago. The whole town knows now. I finally understand why he could never love me fully. He's been broken since he was 18 years old. He never got to heal from losing you." Margaret nodded softly. "It's not an excuse for how he treated you. You deserved honesty. You deserved someone who loved you completely." "I know," Clara said, a faint, sad smile tugging at her lips. "I loved him for 15 years because I saw the good in him, the hurt, lonely boy beneath the wealthy, cold exterior. I knew he had pain. I just hoped I could fix it. But some pain can't be fixed by anyone except the person who caused it. Or the person he lost," Margaret thought silently. "I don't hate you, Margaret," Clara continued softly. "I was angry at first. Humiliated. Heartbroken. But I realize now you're not the villain in this story. We're both just two women who loved a man who was always meant to belong to someone else. You spent 40 years suffering because of his sacrifice. I spent 15 years suffering because of his guilt. We're both victims of fate." Margaret's eyes softened with admiration. Clara was kinder, more compassionate, more gracious than she had any right to be after such devastating heartbreak. "You're a better person than me." "No," Clara said, shaking her head. "I'm just finally letting go. I loved Elias for 15 years, but I'm tired of loving someone who can never love me back fully. I'm tired of being the second choice, the consolation prize, the safe option while his heart chases a ghost from his past." She took a deep, steadying breath, finally finding peace within her grief. "I'm going to leave Havenbrook. I'm going to travel, start over somewhere new, build a life that's just mine, no unrequited love, no broken dreams, no leftover pieces of someone else's story. I deserve a fresh start too." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "You deserve the world, Clara. I hope you find every bit of happiness you've always deserved." "Thank you," Clara said softly. "And you, You and Elias deserve your second chance. After 40 years of pain, after all the sacrifices and secrets and loneliness. Don't let guilt ruin it for you. Don't let my heartbreak stop you from being happy. It was the most gracious, selfless thing Margaret had ever heard a heartbroken person say. Clara was letting them go, letting them love freely, letting them finally have the happiness they had earned after a lifetime of suffering. The two women parted on peaceful, forgiving terms that day, ending the bitter love triangle with grace and maturity, a rare, beautiful resolution to a messy, decades-long drama. Chapter 5: Second Chances in Middle Age. With Clara's blessing and her peaceful departure from town, the weight of guilt lifted from Margaret and Elias's shoulders, allowing them to fully embrace their second chance at love without reservation or regret. The winter months slowly faded into early spring, the snow melting from the streets of Havenbrook, the bare trees budding with new green leaves, the ocean wind growing softer and warmer each day. Margaret decided to stay in Havenbrook permanently. She packed up her city apartment, transferred her design business to a remote freelance model, and settled into her childhood home, finally rooted in the town she had spent 40 years running from. For the first time in her adult life, she felt at home, felt safe, felt truly happy. Elias stepped back from most of his business responsibilities, handing day-to-day operations to his trusted team, choosing to prioritize the life he had spent 40 years missing over the wealth and power he had spent his life building. Wealth had meant nothing to him without love, without the woman he had sacrificed everything to protect. They built a quiet, gentle middle-aged life together, slow and steady and full of the small joys they had been denied in their youth. They woke up early each morning to drink coffee on the porch and watch the sunrise over the ocean. They took long walks along the waterfront, holding hands like teenagers, talking about their days, their dreams, their quiet hopes for the future. They cooked simple meals together in the old kitchen, laughed over old memories, and cherished every ordinary moment they had once taken for granted. Their love was no longer the reckless, passionate infatuation of teenage youth. It was deeper, softer, wiser, tempered by decades of grief, loneliness, and survival. They loved each other not for perfect youth or naive dreams, but for their scars, their flaws, their broken pasts, and the incredible strength they had both shown to survive 40 years apart. One soft spring evening, exactly 40 years to the month since Elias had been forced to leave her, he took Margaret back to the old waterfront pier where they had fallen in love as kids. The sun set in a blaze of orange and pink over the ocean, the sky warm and bright, the water calm and glistening beneath the fading light. They stood side by side at the wooden railing, silent and content, watching the sunset together, two middle-aged souls finally home after a lifetime of wandering. "I never thought I'd get this," Margaret said softly, leaning her head gently on his shoulder. "Never thought I'd get to stand here with you again, happy and free, no secrets, no threats, no goodbyes." Elias wrapped his arm securely around her waist, pulling her close to his chest, holding her like he never intended to let go. "I promised you forever when we were 18. I broke that promise once. I'm spending the rest of my life keeping it now." He pulled back slightly, turning to face her, his hazel eyes soft and sincere, filled with endless love and gratitude. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple silver ring, no diamonds, no grandeur, just a quiet, timeless band perfect for two people finding love again in the middle of their lives. "I don't have grand teenage promises anymore," he said softly, kneeling gently on one knee on the weathered wooden pier, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't have youthful naivety or endless reckless hope. But I have 40 years of regret, 40 years of longing, 40 years of knowing you're the only person I will ever love. I want to marry you, Margaret. Not as kids with big dreams, but as adults with broken pasts and grateful hearts. I want to grow old with you. I want to spend every remaining year of my life making up for the decades we lost. Tears streamed down Margaret's face, happy, grateful, healing tears, 40 years of sorrow melting away into pure, perfect joy. She nodded rapidly, her voice shaking with emotion. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Elias slipped the simple silver ring onto her finger, his hand steady and gentle, sealing their second chance at forever beneath the spring sunset, on the same pier where their love had begun and almost died 4 decades earlier. He stood, pulling her into his arms, kissing her softly, tenderly, the kiss of 2 soulmates reunited after a lifetime apart, a kiss full of healing, forgiveness, and endless, enduring love. Their story was not a perfect fairy tale. It was messy, tragic, full of decades of heartbreak, misunderstanding, and sacrifice. It hurt people, broke hearts, and cost them half their lives. But it was theirs. A mature, hard-won, deeply human love that proved even broken hearts can heal, even lost time can be reclaimed, and even in middle age, it is never too late to find your person, to fix your past, and to love again fully and fearlessly. In the end, after 40 years of scars and sorrow, time did not steal their love. It perfected it. Chapter 6: Quiet Trials of a Late-Life Union. The spring wedding was small, intimate, stripped of the grand, youthful extravagance 18-year-old Margaret had once daydreamed about. There were no overflowing floral arches, no crowded guest lists, no lavish ballroom receptions. Instead, they exchanged their vows on the same weathered wooden pier where they'd reunited, as the soft golden sunset spilled over the Atlantic, the ocean breeze carrying the faint salt scent that had woven through every chapter of their love story. Only a handful of local friends and distant relatives attended, quiet witnesses to a union decades in the making, a love forged not in teenage passion, but in grief, sacrifice, hard-won forgiveness, and mature, unshakable devotion. Margaret wore a simple ivory linen dress, tailored softly to fit her middle-aged frame, her grey-streaked brown hair pulled back in a loose, elegant chignon, no heavy makeup to mask the faint laugh lines and subtle age marks that told the story of her long, hard life. Elias stood beside her in a crisp dark suit, the silver at his temples glinting in the sunset light, his eyes fixed solely on her, unblinking and tender. There was no nervous excitement of young love, no giddy rush of new beginnings, only calm, profound gratitude, the quiet relief of 2 people who had spent a lifetime searching for each other, finally home. Their vows were unscripted, raw, and unpolished, far more honest than any generic wedding promise. Margaret spoke first, her voice steady but thick with quiet emotion, her hands folded gently in front of her as she met Elias's stormy hazel eyes. I loved you once as a girl, blindly and fiercely, with no understanding of how cruel life could be, she began, her words carrying softly on the wind. I spent 40 years believing you'd abandoned me, letting bitterness harden my heart, letting loneliness become my safest comfort. I learned to live without you, to build a life that was quiet and unbroken, even if it was empty. But now I know the truth. I know your silence was not cruelty, but sacrifice. Your absence was not rejection, but protection. We have lost more years than we will ever get back, and I will never stop grieving the youth we wasted apart. But I choose you now, not the reckless boy from my memories, but the broken, loyal, loving man you are today. I choose our scars, our mistakes, our decades of sorrow. I choose to love you slowly, gently, and completely, for every remaining day we have left. Tears glistened in Elias's eyes as he listened, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion, every word sinking deep into the fractured parts of his heart he'd thought would never heal. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was rough, weathered by 40 years of unspoken regret and hidden longing, his gaze never straying from Margaret's face. I have carried your name like a prayer and a penance for 40 years, he said quietly. At 18, I thought sacrifice was enough. I thought letting you hate me would keep you safe, that losing you was the only way to give you a peaceful life. I was wrong. Safety without you was empty. Success without you was meaningless. Every fortune I built, every empire I raised, every quiet night I endured alone was nothing more than a hollow substitute for the future I threw away to protect you. I hurt 2 good women in my lifetime, lived half a century in shadow and guilt, all because I was a scared kid with no power and no choice. Today, I vow to spend every remaining year of my life making amends. I will love you openly, fearlessly, without secrets, without shadows. I will cherish the quiet days we have left, hold you through every hard memory, and never let you feel abandoned again. You are my first love, my only love, and my final peace. When they kissed, it was not the fiery, desperate kiss of teenage infatuation. It was soft, slow, and reverent, a kiss of healing, of closure, of a lifetime of waiting finally fulfilled. The small crowd cheered softly, their voices gentle and warm, honoring the fragile, beautiful second chance the 2 middle-aged soulmates had been granted against all odds. Marriage in middle age was nothing like the youthful fantasies Margaret had once clung to. There were no careless late nights, no impulsive adventures, no endless stretches of unbroken happiness. Their love came with baggage, with old wounds that still ached on quiet days, with years of ingrained loneliness that made vulnerability feel foreign and scary. They were not 2 perfect people starting fresh. They were 2 broken souls learning to fit their fractured lives together, one quiet day at a time. The first few months of their marriage were filled with gentle adjustment and quiet friction, small struggles no young couple would ever face. Margaret had spent 40 years living alone, making every decision for herself, growing accustomed to silence and solitude. She was used to coming and going as she pleased, to arranging her home and her days in perfect, unchanging order, and learning to share her space, her routines. Her quiet life with another person felt both comforting and unsettling. There were small, trivial disagreements that stemmed not from anger, but from a lifetime of solitary living, Elias's habit of rising before dawn to walk the waterfront, Margaret's quiet need for alone time in the evenings, their different ways of processing grief and old memories. Elias, too, carried the scars of decades of isolation. Years of living with a quiet, unspoken guilt, years of caring for a sick wife out of obligation, years of leaning on Clara's steady kindness without ever truly opening his heart had left him reserved, cautious, slow to trust in uncomplicated happiness. He would wake in the middle of the night, his mind haunted by the what-ifs of their past. What if his mother had never threatened Margaret's family? What if he'd found a way to fight back all those years ago? What if they'd had the young, ordinary life they'd once dreamed of, complete with children and decades of shared joy, instead of a late-life reunion steeped in sorrow? There were nights they lay awake, beside each other in the quiet dark of their bedroom, the ocean wind whispering outside the window, neither of them speaking, both lost in the weight of their lost years. On those hard nights, Margaret would turn into Elias's chest, her fingers brushing the silver streaks in his hair, and he would hold her tighter, his hands gentle and protective, no words needed between them. They knew each other's ghosts now, understood each other's unspoken pain, and that quiet familiarity was stronger than any youthful passion could ever be. Town gossip never fully faded, even months after their wedding. The residents of Havenbrook still whispered about their tragic history, still side-eyed Margaret in local shops, still murmured about the way Clara had been left broken and alone to start over elsewhere. Some neighbors never forgave her for being the other woman in Elias's long-term relationship, blind to the decades of secrets and sacrifice that had shaped every choice they'd made. Margaret tried not to let the judgment bother her, tried to focus on the quiet, perfect life she'd built with Elias, but the old guilt lingered, a faint, constant ache in the back of her heart. One afternoon in late spring, a handwritten letter arrived at their home, postmarked from a coastal town hundreds of miles away. It was from Clara. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, half afraid of the anger and resentment she expected to find on the pages inside. But the letter held no malice, no bitterness, no regret. Clara's handwriting was steady and calm, the words honest and gracious, proof that she had truly found peace in her fresh start. Dear Margaret and Elias, I hope this letter finds you both well, happy in the second chance life has granted you. I have spent the past few months traveling the coast, rebuilding my life slowly, learning to prioritize my own joy after 15 years of loving someone who could never fully be mine. I do not hate you, nor do I mourn the end of what Elias and I shared. I have come to understand that some love stories are not meant to last, not because anyone is at fault, but because two people's souls are never truly aligned. Elias, I forgive you for your dishonesty, for your selfishness, for letting me love a ghost for 15 years. I hope you finally find the peace you have spent 40 years chasing with Margaret. You deserve to heal from the trauma of your youth, to stop punishing yourself for a choice no child should ever have been forced to make. Margaret, do not carry guilt for our story. You were a victim of the same cruel fate that broke Elias and me. Your love was not selfish, nor was it intentional. You have spent enough lifetimes suffering for mistakes that were never yours. Be happy. Love fiercely. Cherish every day you have together, for you have earned every bit of your joy. I have bought a small cottage by the ocean here. I volunteer at a local community center. I walk the beach every morning. I am learning to love my own company after a lifetime of loving others first. I am free now, and I wish the same freedom for both of you. No hard feelings, only gratitude for the lessons I've learned. With kindness, Clara. Tears streamed down Margaret's face as she finished reading, her heart lightening for the first time since she'd returned to Havenbrook. The weight of guilt she'd carried for months melted away completely, replaced by sincere joy for the woman who had chosen kindness over bitterness, healing over hatred. Elias read the letter beside her, his face soft with quiet relief, his hand squeezing hers tightly as he exhaled a breath he'd been holding since their breakup with Clara. She's a better person than either of us, Elias murmured quietly, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. Margaret nodded, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into a small wooden box on their shelf, a reminder of grace, forgiveness, and the beauty of letting go. We all got our second chances, she said softly. Hers just looks different from ours. Chapter 7 Summer Days and Healed Scars. Summer settled over Havenbrook warm and gentle, softening the sharp winter winds that had greeted Margaret on her homecoming. The town bloomed with greenery, the waterfront lined with blooming seagrass and colorful wildflowers, the ocean glinting bright blue under the unbroken sunshine. Margaret and Elias fell into a quiet, effortless routine, the kind of peaceful, ordinary life they'd both spent decades craving but never dared to hope they'd have. Margaret ran her interior design business remotely from their sunlit home, taking on small, personal projects, instead of the high-stakes corporate work that had consumed her city life. She designed cozy beach cottages for local residents, poured her heart into small, meaningful spaces, and found joy in the slow, unrushed pace of her days. No longer driven by loneliness, or the need to prove her self-sufficiency, she worked because she loved it, not because it was the only stability she had. Elias fully stepped away from the bulk of his business empire, trusting his longtime team to manage his real estate holdings and investments. He still checked in weekly, still oversaw major decisions, but he no longer let wealth and power consume his days. After 40 years of chasing success to fill the void of Margaret's absence, he finally had something infinitely more precious to prioritize: the quiet, everyday love of his wife. Their days were simple, unremarkable, and perfect. They woke at sunrise to make coffee together on the porch, watching the ocean turn from pale gray to brilliant gold. They walked the waterfront every morning, hand in hand, greeting local fishermen and neighbors who had long since softened their judgment, growing accustomed to seeing the town's reclusive millionaire softened by love. They cooked breakfast together, read side by side in the sunlit living room, took slow drives along the coastal highway in the late afternoons, talking for hours about every memory, every regret, every quiet dream they still held for their future. They began to revisit the old places that had defined their youthful love, turning painful memories into new, joyful ones. They went to the old coastal roadside where they'd shared their first kiss, now lined with mature trees and blooming summer flowers. They sat on the hood of Elias's classic old truck, just as they had as teenagers, but this time, there was no fear of separation, no looming threat of loss, no secret shadow hanging over their happiness. They were older, softer, scarred, but finally free. One warm summer evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Margaret turned to Elias, her voice quiet and thoughtful, a question she'd carried for months finally slipping free. "Do you ever regret it? Staying away from me for 40 years? Even knowing it was to save my family?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the rolling ocean waves, his fingers brushing gently over the silver wedding band on his finger. "I regret every single day I spent without you," he said honestly, no pretense, no avoidance. "I don't regret saving your family. I would make that choice 1,000 times over to keep the people you loved safe. But I regret the loneliness I put you through. I regret letting you believe you were unlovable for 40 years. I regret every holiday, every birthday, every quiet night we spent apart. I regret the youth we lost, the memories we never got to make, the years we can never reclaim." He turned to face her, his eyes soft and earnest, filled with a love deeper and truer than any youthful infatuation. "But I don't regret the man it made me. That pain taught me to cherish every second we have now. It taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about choosing each other, every single day, even when it's late, even when we're broken, even when we have so little time left." Margaret leaned into his side, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers lacing tightly through his. "I used to hate time for stealing you from me," she whispered. "Now I thank time for bringing you back." They talked that night about aging, about the quiet reality of loving someone in your 50s, about the limited years they had left to love each other fully. They acknowledged the hard truth that they would never have decades of growing old together like young couples, never have children to carry on their love story, never have the long, endless future they'd once dreamed of. But they also agreed that the quality of their love far outweighed the quantity of time they had left. Their love was weathered, tested, purified by suffering, far stronger and more genuine than any young, unbroken love could ever be. As summer turned to gentle autumn, the last of the town's gossip faded completely. The residents of Havenbrook stopped seeing their story as a messy scandal and began to see it for what it was: a tragic, beautiful tale of two soulmates torn apart by cruelty and circumstance, finally reunited against all odds. Neighbors waved warmly when they passed, local shop owners greeted them with kindness, and the quiet judgment that had hung over them for months vanished entirely. They hosted a small harvest dinner at their home one crisp autumn evening, inviting a handful of close local friends, sharing warm food and quiet laughter, building new, happy memories to overwrite the sorrows of their past. For the first time in 40 years, Margaret felt fully, unshakably at home, not just in the town of Havenbrook, but in her own life, in her own heart, in the love she'd spent a lifetime waiting for. That night, after their guests had left and the house fell quiet, Elias pulled Margaret into his arms in the moonlit living room, swaying slowly to no music, just holding her close. "We finally get to have the quiet life we wanted," he murmured against her hair. Margaret smiled, pressing a soft kiss to his chest, her heart full and peaceful. "We finally get to have us," she corrected gently. Time had stolen their youth, wasted their decades, broken their hearts, and torn them apart for a lifetime. But time had also softened their scars, healed their wounds, taught them patience, gratitude, and the true meaning of unconditional love. They had lost 40 years to secrets, cruelty, and fate, but they had gained a love so pure, so hard-won, so deeply cherished, that every moment of their suffering had been worth it. For the rest of their days, they would love slowly, bravely, and unapologetically. They would honor their lost youth by cherishing every remaining moment of their middle and old age. They would carry their scars proudly, as proof that even the most broken hearts can heal, even the most lost love can be found again, and even after a lifetime of sorrow, it is never too late to come home to the person who was always meant to be yours.